Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. We are going to jump right into openings in the Robert Tellis trial. But first, before we get started, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. What song was meant for Elvis that was a huge hit for Jimmy Buffett? Margaritaville. I can't picture it. To say that what evidence the state put up today in the Robert Tellis trial was huge is an understatement. I'm just going to play some random footage from today's testimony. The footage is not in any particular order. I just grabbed some during testimony, and it's pretty self-explanatory. A lot of the footage is going to be from the search warrant done at Robert Tellis's home, as well as some testimony with video from the last witness of today showing a dark maroon GMC SUV, exactly like the one Robert Tellis has, making the moves from his home towards Jeff's and then around a while and then ultimately ending back up at Jeff's. There's also some footage you will see, kind of a bluish grayish color Honda. That is the victim, Jeff Gearman's car. So I just want to put that out there so you kind of have an idea of what you're seeing. The state opens with, on September 2nd, Jeff's neighbors were worried about him. They noticed the garage was open and his car was inside. They called and texted with no response. That evening, the neighbor went to shut the door, but Jeff still had not responded. The next day, the neighbor went to check on Jeff and found him dead at the side of his house. Jeff was over 60, and the neighbor thought initially he had a medical episode, but discovered he had been murdered. He had stab wounds and signs of decomposition. Jeff's phone, wallet, and keys were all in his pockets, and robbery was not really looked at as a motive. They looked close at the bushes near Jeff and saw blood, and also blood on the outdoor decorations. Detectives and crime scene analysts looked inside his house with no signs of struggle or forced entry. There was a receipt from a taco shop in his trash from the day of his murder at 9:03 a.m. Investigators go and find surveillance of Jeff in the final hours of his life. The neighbor who found him had a home surveillance system pointing to the front of Jeff's house, and you see a figure come to the side of his house, dressed in orange. The person stays, waiting for Jeff. Jeff opens his garage, goes to the side yard, and he's attacked. You see the suspect leave the side yard and walk away. He's picked up on another surveillance camera further down the street, where he is seen getting into a maroon Yukon Denali. A crime scene analyst collected fingernail clippings and scrapings for DNA and found foreign DNA present. Images were released of the suspect and the vehicle to the public, and people started calling in. Robert is mentioned by several. He was the elected public administrator for Clark County, and in 2022, Tellis was running for re-election. Jeff had written a series of unflattering articles about Tellis, some alleging an affair with a coworker, being a bad manager, favoritism, and bullying in his office. Another person had to take over the management. Tellis lost the primary, and Jeff wrote about that. Tellis made a post on social media saying the articles were politically motivated and biased. Jeff wrote another article after this. Tellis accused Jeff on Twitter of going through his trash, bullying him, and investigators find out the Tellis family had a maroon Denali. They map out the route between Jeff and Robert's house. On the morning of the murder, the video showed Tellis leaving in the SUV from his home. They get more surveillance showing the SUV at various places in the area of Jeff's neighborhood. The driver is seen in orange clothing. He's picked up on cameras walking to and from Jeff's house before and after the murder. They get a search warrant on September 7th for a DNA sample from Tellis and seize his phone and search his house. They go through some of the things really quickly that are very damning to Tellis. They show a photo of his ring finger and there is a noticeable injury on the very tip of his ring finger. They also talk about under the couch, they find cut up gray shoes with blood stains in a Ziploc, and then a whole shoe, which matches the shoes the suspect was seen wearing on surveillance. In the garage, they find a bag just like the one the suspect was seen carrying on surveillance. They found a grocery bag with a hat that was cut up, just like the one the suspect wore in the videos. They returned Tellis to his house on the 7th and rushed to process his DNA sample that same day. And the DNA from the fingernails is consistent with Tellis. Tellis self-harms while being arrested. His phone shows some of the texts between Jeff and Robert. The first is from May 10th, 2022, where Jeff said he was putting together a story about a hostile work environment and also the affair. Tellis agrees to be interviewed and invites Jeff where they sit down for an interview. Tellis tells Jeff, "You heard from employees," meaning his favorites, "who were harassed by these people. It's not fair and balanced." Jeff texts him on May 25th, 2022, and acknowledges that someone has been brought in as a consultant to work in the office and asks for a comment. Tellis said he would get back with Jeff later that evening with a comment. But Tellis posts the statement on social media denying the allegations. Jeff runs that story about the consultant being brought in, and he texts Tellis on June 16th saying he's working on another story. Tellis says, "It's fine. At this point, they won. Do what you like." Tellis loses the primary. An investigator finds from the phone extractions of Tellis's phone in his files, he looked on Google Maps and found photos of Jeff's home from the front and also the side of the house where Jeff was found dead. The search warrant from Tellis's office, computer searches make and model of Jeff's car. In July of 2022, Jeff files for a public records request for documents and communications between Tellis and his suspected lover, Roberta Lee Kennett. He asks for texts from cell phones and says they're required to respond to public records requests. The county tells Tellis that Jeff is asking for these communications and they will work to get those for him. Tellis says he would like to see what is being provided prior to those communications being sent to Jeff. Weeks pass, and attorneys for the county email Tellis and his suspected girlfriend, Lee Kennett, 15 hours before the murder and notified them that in response to public records requests, emails and team messages between the two would be provided to the Review Journal after noon on Tuesday, September 6th. The defense gets up and shows a photo of Tellis with his wife and kids. He's a loving father, a family man, and he's a husband. He's a self-made man. He worked doing HVAC to put himself through school. He became president of the university bar and ran his own probate firm and was named pro bono attorney of the year in 2016. His defense spends a little bit of time for sure pumping up Mr. Tellis, telling of all the good he's done. Says that Mr. Tellis wanted to clean up the Office of Public Administration, but he upset the apple cart. Unlimited, unnecessary overtime was done away with. He found unlimited and unnecessary overtime. Some employees were reporting 40 plus hours a week in overtime, and those changes were not received well. That created the hostile work environment. With the overtime dropped, they quote his favorite employee saying Tellis helped her succeed. The others wanted her to fail. His defense attorney kind of paints him as the hero of this division, uncovering wrongdoings, and he was put in contact with a detective who investigates public corruption, as well as laws being broken, to estates being stolen from. Tellis put together a report to expose the corruption, and it was sent to that detective on March 6, 2022. It also contained the names of people he was concerned about and contained proof of the corruption. The detective said he would assist in building a bribery and corruption case. Tellis says he's having a meeting with someone he implicated in his report and asked the detective if he should try to get a statement. The investigator started surveillance on one of the targets. Rita Reed and her supporters began to follow Tellis and Lee Kennett, getting out of the back of the car to persuade Jeff to investigate. Rita announces she'll run for public administration. And 2 weeks after the article, she gets a $10,000 campaign donation from Compass Realty. You hear follow the money? That's what Tellis was asking Detective Jappy to do. He first looks at the bad actors, but pivots and begins looking into Robert Tellis. The detective texts Tellis on May 16th and says he's still working, saw the article that Jeff put out, and asked if he's good. Tellis says he's hanging in there and will forward him the truth of the matter. Tellis told him, I told the reporter everything, but that doesn't sell papers. The detective says, I understand. Sorry you have to go through this, but the truth will prevail. The detective was approached by Kimberly McMahon. The defense says she was put up to this by Alicia Goodwin. Remember, we talked about her in the backstory. She filed those complaints about Tellis, and also Rita Reed. McMahon said Tellis had previously attempted to receive kickbacks in exchange for real estate listings referred from the public administrator's office. The defense says this was to get the detective to turn on Tellis. At the time of the allegations of kickbacks, McMahon was also a lieutenant for the Las Vegas Police Department. The defense says that Tellis soliciting kickbacks from an officer is absurd. Detective Jappy files for a pen register and a tap and trace of Tellis's phone and initiates surveillance of Tellis. This surveillance continues until the murder and up to his arrest. He's with family, he's home, nothing more. The day of the murder, no cell site trap and trace evidence implicating Tellis. He's home. Around noon, he's at a gym working out after he supposedly commits the murder. The maroon car never positively identified. The DMV search produced 67 possible matches. He said it's Metro who should be getting this information. Searching for evidence never follows up on the other vehicles. They get into no blood being inside the Denali, no blood on the shoes. They also mentioned that none of Tellis's blood was at the crime scene, even though the crime scene was extremely bloody and he had that finger injury. Why were the hat and shoes cut up? Easier to conceal and plant. Yes, that's going to be their defense. This is all a setup. He has been framed. He's done nothing wrong. The witness said the killer was spotted in the same outfit days before the murder, researching the location. They'll say he searched, but why the meandering if so? Tellis washing his vehicle? He was under surveillance and washed 3 cars in front of his house. They may say he was cleaning up. Wouldn't there be blood inside? It was a bloody crime. There was none. Nothing showing him trying to conceal any evidence. The defense mentions that injury on Tellis's finger, says there's no blood of his at the scene, and says they will later tell the jury how that wound happened. He goes on to talk about strange behavior by Detective Jappy, implicates Tellis in the murder, inserts himself into the investigation, and there is a traffic stop with Tellis on September 7th. Requests for those body cams were made. In July of 2023, the judge orders that to be turned over. That video was found to be destroyed. But Jappy is there at the arrest and goes with Tellis in the ambulance. Tellis's life is coming apart, and on September 7th, they say they have warrants. He cooperates. They stop him. He cooperates. The self-harm attempt was because he lost an election. He was getting pressed and getting charged with a murder he said he didn't do. Detective Jappy is there during the Tellis interview. The defense says to insert himself and do homicide investigations. I'd say he wanted to dictate the direction the homicide investigation is taking. Losing his job isn't motive for murder for Tellis. They show some tweets from Tellis saying his wife heard some rustling in the trash, thought maybe it was a wild animal, and Tellis makes a joke and says, no, it's Jeff doing another story on me. He's making fun of this. He's not happy, but he's addressing it in a public forum. Killing a journalist doesn't kill a story. Still wanting to right wrongs on his way out of office. The defense attorney says that Jeff was a good reporter, but he made far more dangerous people more mad. They play 3 threatening voicemails that were sent to Jeff before his murder. I'm not playing them. It's a bunch of F-bombs. You can't even tell what they're saying. So the first witness, Holly Bailey, she lives across the street from Jeff. Her husband is the one that found Jeff deceased. They had lived across the street for 26 or 27 years. And the day of the murder, they noticed the garage door was open just before noon. And what was odd about that is Jeff never left it open and his car was inside. She had a bad feeling, but she went on and did her things and it stayed open all afternoon. When she got back home between 3:30 and 4, she texted him, but there was no response. She talked to another long-term neighbor who agreed it's strange that garage door had been up all day. The witness and her husband decided when it gets dark, we'll go over there. She emailed and texted Jeff and said they were going to go shut the garage door. She thought maybe he left town and just didn't close it. So they walked over and pulled the string and brought it down. The next morning, her husband woke her up early and asked her to call 311 to have a welfare check called in on Jeff. She said, "Let me email him one more time." And at this point, her husband said he would just go check in the backyard. The witness, bless her heart, she gets emotional on the stand. I'm telling you, when you've had neighbors that long for decades, they're like family. She pauses, gets very emotional, and says her granddaughter came running in the house sobbing and screaming, and her husband was outside on the phone with 911. He was so frantic, the operator had a hard time understanding what he was saying. Dispatch was asking, "How do you know he's dead?" He was asking, "Well, why can't you get the police here? I know he's dead." The witness, she did see Jeff laying there when she went to her husband. She said there was an officer walking up slowly and she asked him to please hurry. Next witness, Roy Bailey, the prior witness's husband who found Jeff, he repeats a lot of what his wife said on the stand there. He did say that on some mornings around 8 a.m., Jeff would go out to get coffee and they would see each other when he returned. He then was going around back, and that's the moment he saw Jeff on the side of the house, and he immediately called 911 from his cell phone. When he was interviewed, investigators learned the neighbor had surveillance, and of course, he gave them permission for them to download it. The defense asked if the interview you had with investigators was formal or not. He says he thinks they recorded it, but it was there on scene. The next witness, Debbie Ryan, another neighbor, she lives directly beside the previous two neighbors. They've been there 27 or 28 years. And unless Jeff was outside working on his lawn or in his garage, that door was always closed. She noticed midday the garage was open, but didn't think much about it. She just thought he was outside working. Later on, garage door still open, so she went and knocked on the front door, rang the doorbell, no answer, so she went back home. She thought maybe he could be taking a shower or something. This is the point where they talked to the other neighbors and they agreed they should go shut the garage door. And the next morning, this witness went to a ball game and got a call in the morning from her neighbor who was screaming and crying and said, "Jeff is dead." They leave the game and go straight home where they see now cops are on scene. The defense asked if the cops recorded the conversation they had with her, and she doesn't remember. The next witness, Claire Browning, she is a senior crime scene analyst with the Las Vegas PD. She responds to crime scenes and documents the scene. What they usually do when they get there, they do a walkthrough to prioritize the scene and divide up the duties among the crime scene analysts. That day, she was the photographer. They show photos from the very front of the house. They flash up a couple of pictures, y'all, of his body at the scene and then in the morgue. In his left front pocket was his cell phone. In the other front pocket was his key. Wallet was in the rear pocket that had cash and credit cards. There were broken branches and blood on the bushes near his body, and those bushes and rocks were disturbed. They bagged the hands to preserve DNA evidence, and they also wrapped the body in a clean sheet for the same reason. They show interior photos of Jeff's home, very clean, neat house. His gate wasn't latched, and there was a slash in the window, but that scene was confined to the side of the house. They show blood pooled under the bush. There's blood on the branches, on the rocks. It's just everywhere, y'all. On cross, you and two other crime scene analysts, did you arrive at the same time? She said she arrived at approximately 2:41. Everybody took separate cars. And when she got there, another crime scene analyst was already there. She was there with homicide and other patrol officers. The defense asked at length how many people were there, who was there, because we know their whole theory is all this was planted and his client's innocent. He asked if she knows how long his hands were exposed prior to her arrival. No. They talk about a knife block from Jeff's home that had no knives missing. He asked if she looked or photographed what was in drawers. No. You don't know what was in there before or after the murder? No. They move on to that window. It's on the other side of the gate where he was found. You don't know if it was slashed? No. She said it could just be a defect. On a redirect, do you wear gloves to prevent contamination? Yup. There's a recross here. This one sort of surprised me. This wasn't treated as a homicide scene at first, and she says no. Not sure where that's at, but clearly a homicide from, unfortunately, the photo we saw of poor Jeff that was briefly flashed up on the screen today. The next witness, Jamie Yost with the Las Vegas Police Department. She is the public information officer. She's the one that put out the photos of the SUV as well as the video of the suspect walking up and down the road in Jeff's neighborhood. The defense asked, was she involved about someone called Bob the burglar in the area? Yes. 1 to 2 months before Jeff's homicide, apparently there was somebody walking around the neighborhood. The next witness, Stephanie Smithson. She's with the Las Vegas PD crime scene analyst. She's the one that brought in the photos of the search warrant. There is a photo of gray scissors. Looks like there was blood on there. They show the gray shoe, the whole one, which was the same as the ones seen on the foot of the suspect. Then we see the partially cut up shoe. It's cut in really small pieces in a Ziploc bag under his couch. They did swab one for DNA that had a reddish brown stain. In a farmer's market grocery bag was a cut up straw hat, much like the one seen on surveillance. On cross, who was there when you got there at 9:30? Which homicide detective did you interact with? Was Metro Intelligence there? She's like, I don't know. He says, you're in and out of that house for 4 hours and you can't notice who was there. She said, I don't know. There were so many people. The defense says exactly. There were so many people. He asked about the bag found in the house and asked if she found it. She did not. She was summoned by a homicide detective. Next witness, Jonathan Martinez. He works for multiple plumbing services as an employee. The job he does can go on for months. They were working on Jeff Street and they see that red GMC, red or maroon. They're required to wear bright orange safety shirts. On the day of the murder, he sees the maroon car and it caught his attention. The car parked in front of the barricade. He did see the driver who was wearing orange, and the witness pulls up in the middle of the road and the red car was facing the opposite direction. The driver waved to the witness and drove away. And they played the video showing him pulling up where they're doing this work on the road. On cross, he was shown the video the following week after the murder. He said he really didn't remember that interaction with that car, but it was recorded when he gave a statement to police. The defense says, you didn't remember this a couple of days later and you never saw his face? The witness said, I did for a short time. And then the defense asked, were you shown lineups? No. Next witness, Detective Clifford. He's retired from the Las Vegas PD. On September 3rd, he responded to Jeff's house. He was an assistant lead detective. His job that day was canvassing for surveillance video in the area. He prepared a PowerPoint for his testimony. Really well done. Laid it out very nicely, I think, for that jury. They looked 5.4 miles between the two men's residences to gather any and all cameras that they could. There were about 25 detectives total on the search for that, and they found a lot. Some of it had evidentiary value, some not. They also found videos of Jeff and the suspect. Jeff went to that taco place around 9 a.m. In all, they used footage from 22 different cameras. Jeff leaves his home about 8:47 a.m. and arrives at the taco shop, which was about 2.4 miles away. He is inside that taco shop by 9:04. At 9:10 a.m., there is that red SUV seen leaving near where Tellis lives. You also see footage of Tellis going back in the direction of his house. 9:11 a.m., Jeff leaves the taco shop. 9:12, the red SUV seen leaving home again. 9:19, Jeff arrives home. At 10:03, Jeff leaves his home again. 10:26, the red SUV is a couple of blocks from Jeff's house. 10:26, the red SUV is seen on another street in the same area of Jeff's house. The witness also points out one thing he noticed is in the surveillance and also the day of the search warrant when the car was seized, that passenger side visor was still down. It was not up. Also, on the passenger side area, just below the windshield, kind of at the first part of the metal, there is a defect on that car. It looks to be a lighter color area. That stood out to him when he saw it in person. The front driver and passenger windows are not tinted, but the rear windows are. He said it was the same in person as it was on the video. At this point, Tellis is shaking his head no. There were no stickers or decals on the car. At 10:39, the SUV drove past Jeff's house. There was a license plate missing from the back of the SUV when he was in the neighborhood. 10:40, this is when he stops at that roadblock. 10:48, he is seen making a U-turn. 10:54, he's back on the street Jeff lives on. By 10:59, he is seen walking near Jeff's house. And at 11:18, he arrives at Jeff's. 11:21, Jeff opens the garage. He's attacked, and the suspect is seen leaving. 3 minutes later, another camera catches the suspect walking. 11:25, suspect gets into car, puts the bag in the left rear seat, and drives off. 11:29, turns back onto Jeff's street, pulls in front of the house, went back to the side of the house where the attack occurred, and gets back in and leaves. Either he dropped something that he had to go retrieve, or maybe he was just making sure that Jeff was in fact dead, because I have no doubt Jeff would have seen who was doing this to him. At 11:30, the SUV is seen driving away from Jeff's neighborhood. Seen again, 11:35, and the license plate is back on the car. They follow Tellis to where he turns in, where he was first seen turning out before all this started. During the search warrant at the house, they saw a camera near the garage towards the roof. They could not recover any surveillance. They did recover some from a Ring camera, but there was nothing of evidentiary value. There were no other red SUVs in the neighborhood, and the investigator pointed out this is a small neighborhood that Tellis lived in. Cell phone had no movement in the time frame of the murder. That stayed at home. And I will put this footage back up tomorrow so we can let it play all the way through. But that was basically it for today, but a lot of really damning stuff. I mean, they pulled out all the stops today and showed all the ways, points right to Tellis. You have Tellis saying, "Oh, I was framed." We know Tellis is going to take the stand. He is an attorney, tried to represent himself some, ended up and got a lawyer in March this year. But when a defendant takes the stand, I'm going to watch, because it's so interesting to watch how they react to things. Direct will be easy. Cross is where it gets really, really hard. And we'll see if he can keep his cool when things get tough on that stand. We're just getting started on this, but 8 witnesses today. The state plans to call 20. I heard 2 weeks for this trial. At this pace, ain't no way. But maybe Tellis is going to be on that stand a day or two. That'll make it worth it. Ultimately, we all just want some justice for Jeff. When you report on corruption and things like that, it is a dangerous line of work, especially these days. It's going to be an interesting ride on this. I'm live streaming every day. We have a great group in there. Awesome mods. Come chat with us. Hope you guys have a good rest of your afternoon. We will see you soon.